Father's Day was always a grand affair in the Davidson household. A barbecue in the backyard, laughter echoing through the air, and the scent of marinated ribs mingling with freshly cut grass. This year was no different, except for the unsettling undercurrent of tension that seemed to cling to the air like a thick fog. James Davidson, the patriarch of the family, sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the familiar faces of his loved ones. His wife, Susan, bustling with preparations. His daughter, Emily, setting up the decorations with her usual meticulousness. And his son, Tyler, who had just returned home after years abroad, looking oddly distant. As the evening sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the yard, Emily brought out an old wooden box she found in the attic. It was dusty and heavy, the wood darkened with age. "Dad, what's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. James's face paled, a stark contrast to the warmth of the setting sun. "Put that back," he said, his voice trembling slightly, but it was too late. Tyler had already pried open the box, revealing a collection of yellowed papers and faded photographs. A chill descended over the group as Tyler pulled out a photo. It was of James, much younger, standing next to a woman none of them recognized. Behind them, a dilapidated house loomed, its windows like dark, empty eyes. "Who is she?" Tyler's voice was barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. James stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "I said, put it back," he shouted, startling everyone. Susan placed a calming hand on his arm, but he shook her off, his eyes wild with fear. Tyler's curiosity was insatiable. "Dad, we have a right to know," he insisted, his grip tightening on the photo. The others nodded, their eyes fixed on James, waiting for an explanation. James sank back into his chair, defeated. He knew he couldn't keep the secrets buried any longer. "Her name was Margaret," he began, his voice shaking. "She was my first wife." A collective gasp rippled through the family. James had never mentioned a previous marriage. "What happened to her?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. James's eyes glazed over, lost in memories. She died. It was an accident." His words were hollow, lacking conviction. Tyler frowned, sensing there was more to the story. "What kind of accident?" he pressed. James took a deep breath, the air around him growing colder. "The house in the photo, it was ours. We were happy, at first. But then, strange things started happening. Margaret would hear whispers at night, see shadows that didn't belong. She said the house was haunted, but I didn't believe her. Not until it was too late." The family listened in horrified silence as James continued. "One night, I woke up to find her standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at me. Her eyes were empty. She whispered something I couldn't understand, and then she fell. The police called it an accident, but I knew better. The house, it took her." Susan's face was ashen. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice trembling. James looked at her, his eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if I never spoke of it, it couldn't hurt us. But the past has a way of catching up." As the last light of day faded, a sudden chill swept through the yard, extinguishing the candles on the table. The family huddled closer, the darkness pressing in around them. Emily's voice broke the silence. "Is the house still there?" she asked, her curiosity tinged with fear. James nodded slowly. "It is, but no one lives there anymore. It's waiting." Tyler stood, determination in his eyes. "We need to go there. We need to understand what happened." James shook his head vehemently. "No, it's too dangerous. The house, it's alive. It feeds on fear, on secrets." But Tyler was already moving, the photo clutched in his hand. Emily and Susan followed, their fear mingled with a desperate need for answers. James hesitated, the weight of his past pressing down on him, but he knew he couldn't let them face it alone. As they approached the old house, it loomed out of the darkness like a malevolent creature, its windows glinting in the moonlight. The air was thick with an unnatural cold, and the whispers began, faint at first, then growing louder. The door creaked open of its own accord, inviting them in. They stepped over the threshold, the darkness swallowing them whole. Inside, the air was stifling, filled with the scent of decay and despair. James led them to the staircase, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, wrapping around them like invisible tendrils. At the top of the stairs, a shadowy figure stood, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. "Margaret," James breathed, his voice breaking. The figure moved towards him, its movements slow and deliberate. As it drew closer, the whispers intensified, filling their minds with a cacophony of voices. Emily screamed, clutching her head. Tyler reached for her, but the darkness seemed to pull them apart, twisting and warping the space around them. Susan's sobs echoed through the hall, her fear palpable. The figure stopped before James, its eyes boring into his. "Why did you leave me?" it whispered, its voice a haunting echo of Margaret's. James fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry." The figure reached out, its hand cold as ice, and touched his cheek. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. The house seemed to shudder, its dark heart laid bare. In that moment, the family saw the truth. The house was a reflection of their own fears and secrets, feeding off their unresolved guilt and sorrow. And as they confronted their past, the house began to crumble, its dark power dissipating. They stumbled out into the night, the air fresh and clean, the moon shining brightly above. The house behind them was no more than a pile of rubble, its dark influence finally broken. James looked at his family, their faces pale but determined. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger. The past could no longer hold them captive. As they walked away, the whispers faded into the night, their secrets finally laid to rest. This Father's Day, they had not only confronted their fears, but had also found the strength to move forward, leaving the shadows behind.